Njoya Tikum. I work with the United Nations Development Programme's Regional Office for Africa. I work precisely with the governance and peace building team, and what we do is we offer advisory and technical services and support to our 46 countries in sub-Saharan Africa on different aspects of governance. Precisely, I cover the area of anti-corruption, but I also provide coordination support for UNDP's youth programs across the continent. I think if you look at where we are as a continent, and you look at the position that we have collectively put on the young people, you begin to ask yourself if we have missed something. Because at the time when the American Time magazine was telling us in 2002 that the continent was rising, what we were experiencing in the field was a continent where more Africans were running away from. And so you begin to ask yourself, what models have we been using to engage with these young people that from 2002 to 2017, we still see them running away from the continent, when every other economic indicator points to the fact that the continent is rising, that we are getting double-digit GDP, but yet we see a huge exodus of our talent immigrating from the continent. So I think at the heart of this is the understanding that our modality or modus operandi of engaging with young people have failed us. That, as many people have said, we're stuck with the post-colonial era of engagement, which was one of inciting them to be revolutionaries to get our independence, number one, but also inciting them to get into the workforce in areas that were not really necessary for the continent, the growth of the continent. And we have carried that model to 2017. So you now see that we have new forms of challenges. You have different challenges that have either been instigated by technology, information technology, something that did not exist at the time, or that has been instigated by this upward and downward movement across the continent, but also across the Mediterranean. So with the new forms of challenges, with the new forms of development challenges, security imperatives, it requires a new way of thinking on how we engage with young people. So why is it imperative at this moment? It's imperative at this moment because Africa is in a unique position. Everybody has said it. We are perhaps the youngest continent on the planet. And as you know, the issue of demographic dividend appears once in a lifetime. It happened in Asia Pacific, it happened in Southeast Asia. And so if we do not capitalize on these huge youthful population budget that we have now, we are going to miss an era in our history. An era when the continent was supposed to see that transformation that it so desire happen through a different way of engaging with young people. So it's imperative at this time because we have an opportunity to change the narrative of how we have seen young people over the past 50 years. I think that's why it's super important. Despite all the other challenges that you see on the media, what is critical is the advantage and the opportunities that we have now to use the youthful potential that is bubbling on the continent to affect the economic, macro and microeconomic transformation that we require to sustain the growth in Africa over the next 50 years. I think that's at the heart of the whole demographic dividend discourse at the moment. Preconditions for Africa to get to its optimal level on leveraging youth. I think the very first one, I would say, because I'm a governance person, the very first one would be governance, proper governance. Because you see, we can go ahead and talk about all the other preconditions, but if we don't have the right governance structures, nothing else is going to work. Why do I start with governance? Because governance is the bedrock upon which states are built. Institutions are constructed around good governance modalities. Economic models are constructed around economic governance modalities. Environmental issues are constructed and right-based issues are constructed around different governance modalities. So if we do not have the right governance frameworks across the continent, it doesn't matter what we do. We're going to go back to the cycle of the 1950s and 1960s, where young people were seen more as a problem than a solution. So governance is one of the, I think, the primary should be the primary driver for leveraging, the youthful budget. The second one is education. I know we've talked about it a lot, but we are still in a continent where, unfortunately, we celebrate a 60% graduation rate from primary education, when our counterparts in other parts of the world are celebrating 60% graduation rate in terminal degrees, in PhDs and masters. We are still happy to say that 60% of our citizens have primary education. We have to shift the mindset and strategy on how we see empowerment in education. We have to, a lot of people talk about the vocational and tertiary aspects of education. That's fine, but that in itself will not solve the problems we have in our educational system. We have to shift the mindset from one that positions our citizens, educates our citizens to be global players on a continent where the sense of integration, Pan-Africanism is not very well taught, to one that says, listen, our educational purpose is because today we are at a 4% GDP, we want to be at a 9% GDP in 10 years. What do we need? What kinds of educational programs and curriculum should we roll out? So shifting the mindset of what we think about empowerment through the lens of education is a big thing. And precisely, shifting this whole idea about focusing on primary education to now say we have 60% that have graduated. What are we going to do with them over the next 10, 20 years to make sure they get to that level of education that they can start actually contributing productively to our community? So shifting the strategy and the mindset from this post-colonial era of education to now an education that is much more geared towards the transformative agenda is going to be the second precondition. The third precondition, I think, is the whole issue around gender and women's right. Unfortunately, we are still talking about this in 2017, and it irks me because we say that we have, if I go by the African Union definition of young people, we have 894 million Africans below 35. 800, this is a UN population division telling us that. If we have 894 million below the ages of 35, and we are saying that women make up 61% of the African population, in general, it means we probably have about 600 million women, young women, on the continent of Africa, which then means that any development plan, any development priority that doesn't have women at the center of its strategic focus has missed the point. One of the things that I have been very concerned over the past couple of years has been the issue of early child marriage, for example. And I'll tell you why I cite this precisely within the rubric of empowerment. In Tanzania, nearby, they say that 40% of the marriages that occur with girls that are below the ages of 18. It means that 40% of the Tanzanian population is going to be a lost generation over the next Zambia rather, over the next 1 or 2 years to come. Because you know what happened. When they get married below the ages of 18, there is the cultural pressure on them to give birth. If they don't give birth, they have fistula along the line. And so that child, the productive ability of that child to contribute to the society has been vitiated. But not just the child, successive generations that will come. And we are talking about 61% of our population that is constantly being pushed to the side when we should be leveraging on that. So I think the empowerment of the girl child and the women, it's going to be one of those preconditions that we need to put on the table. And very finally, my final precondition, I think, would be in the budgeting models that we have on the continent of Africa, because we talk about youth, we talk about governance issues, but when you drill it down to the governance, the budgeting frameworks that we have in our member states, you realize that very few countries budget through their national fiscal regimes, make allocations for youth empowerment or youth restructuring programs. And so for us to actually make that leap, that jump, our fiscal structures must reflect our economic and social priorities. These are the 4 preconditions I can think of right now, but I'm sure there are a lot more. I just think governance at the end of the day overshadows everything. Education, empowerment, fiscal issues, and gender issues. If you don't have the right governance framework, everything else you're trying to do is not going to catch our attention. AGA, very important. The African governance architecture. One of the good things I found with AGA, and I've been very privileged that I've had a chance to work with AGA now for close to four years, being in Addis, a very close range. One of the standout positive about AGA, despite its political position within the African Union Commission, is that AGA has been that vehicle that has helped export the AU from Addis to the continent. If you go around Africa today and you talk to any young person about the African Union, the first thing you will hear is AGA, to a point where you start thinking that the Secretariat has now become the Union, the Commission. There is a plus and a minus to that, but I choose to focus on the plus because I think for most young people, AGA provides an avenue for them to engage with an institution that has for so long a time been isolated from its citizens across the continent. So AGA has played that role so efficiently in taking and exporting the Commission and the Union to Africans. So that's a very big plus. Now, the second thing I think AGA has done quite well is in setting normative frameworks across the continent. After 5 years, we can truthfully say that because of AGA, we now have a state reporting mechanism, we now have a regional youth engagement strategy, we now have the 50 years of democratization assessment that were done. These are documents and frameworks that have helped shape the way policies are developed across the continent. This is as a result of the sustained efforts that the Secretariat had actually pushed over the past 5 years. Where I think we can do more, obviously, is in looking at the role of AGA within the overall APSA framework, the African Peace and Security Framework, and asking ourselves, is AGA doing what it was created to do within the APSA framework? If it is not, what must we do to make sure we strengthen AGA for it to play the role, that coordination, that secretariat, that leadership role that we all expect that AGA to play within the APSA framework? Because to be honest, the continent is going through a lot of peace and security challenges now. You look from East Africa to Southern Africa to West Africa to Central Africa, you have hotspots of fragility. So AGA's ability to play that centrality role within APSA can help lessen the burden on some of these fragile hotspots that are emerging across the continent, because they do have the reach and the ears of the citizens. I just feel we're not yet there. We've not leveraged the full potential of AGA. But have they done excellent for 5 years? If you have a baby and after 5 years that baby has been able to make the entire community know who you are, the baby is probably doing something very good or something very bad. But I think in this case, AGA has done extremely well. They have helped bridge the role of the Commission, or the work of the Commission, with all the multilateral institutions across the continent, mine being one of those. One of the more sustained engagement we've had with the African Union Commission has happened because of AGA, or through AGA. So I think 5 years, in French they would say le bilan de 5 ans. For AGA, excellent. I will give it an A rating, but I think the next 5 years should take us to the A+ rating that we so desire of that secretariat.